Welcome to the Existential Empath Podcast. My name is Tanya, and I am an intuitive empath. My intention is to share valuable tools and techniques that I have learned so you can tap into your own inner healer naturally and intuitively.
Welcome back, everyone. I have guest Brenden Kumarasamy on with me today. Brenden is a communication coach, and he is the founder of Master Talk. He is the host of the YouTube channel Master Talk, which provides free access to communication tools to everyone in the world. And today, Brenden and I are going to talk about how to communicate effectively and confidently. Thank you for being on the show with me today, Brenden.
Hey, likewise, Tanya. It's good to be on.
Awesome. So what makes someone a good communicator? My entire life have presented in most of my positions. And so it was kind of took me back that a lot of people have a fear of being, able to communicate properly. And so, what does make someone a good communicator?
Right. And it's tricky, right? Because when we think about communication, what does it even mean to be great? Does it mean saying less filler words? Does it mean being better at vocal tones? So the way that I've always measured communication or seen it is simply this. What is my definition of communication? It is simply to convey an idea in a way that achieves a specific outcome for a specific audience. How do we convey an idea in a way that achieves a specific outcome for a specific audience? But the range of that, Tanya, is wide. It could be, a speech that you're getting in front of 1,000 people. It could be a podcast. It could be convincing your significant other that, hey, Mexican food sounds a lot better than Chinese today. Right?
Communication runs our lives, right? It's so crucial and important, and from our personal to our professional lives.
Absolutely. So to your point, what makes a great communicator? I would say it's someone who's able to achieve that outcome, someone who's able to get them, the person they want to convey the idea to take action on it.
Awesome. So how important is listening when it comes to communication?
Absolutely, Tanya. Listening is super important, right? That's why we got 2 ears in one mouth, because we want to listen twice as much as we speak. But what I will say,
that before, I like that.
it's not mine. I think it's Aristotle who said that. But the point I want to drive with listening is the big mistake most people make is they don't practice it that effectively. So I'll give you an example. Like for me, when we think of statements versus questions, a lot of us say statements a lot, but we don't ask enough questions. So I would encourage people who are listening to this podcast, what's one or two extra questions that you can ask somebody else today or tomorrow? Because that will automatically improve your ability to listen.
That's a great exercise. I worked in healthcare and I had to work with a lot of doctors, and I only had maybe 3 minutes to do my spiel, to get them to actively communicate with me. And what I recognized is when I would ask a question and listen, I had a lot more leverage than I did from a sales standpoint, than I did from just shooting off my spiel, So I think that, like you said, it's important to listen more than speak. At least that's been my experience when it comes to communication. And when we are communicating, to make sure that it's effective and precise, like you talked about, that it's very focus driven. So when it comes to communicating, what is some of the biggest challenges that you see, that people are struggling with when it comes to whether it's communicating in relationships or even public speaking along that matter?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of challenges, Tanya. I would say the biggest one is motivation. A lot of people think it's fear, but it's actually motivation. And the reason is because if we're not motivated enough to work on our communication skills, we will never overcome the fear. But if we want it badly enough, we'll push through the fear. So this is why my question is always, how would your life change if you were an exceptional communicator? A lot of us focus so much on the negative, the anxiety, the stress. Whereas for me, it's always been, well, communication is every part of our life. So if we really take a step back to focus on that question, we'll get motivated and actually get this done.
Interesting. So, when I did some of my best speeches, I felt confident in what I was sharing. I think when I struggled is when someone would throw me a topic and I hadn't done my research on it and I didn't really necessarily feel as confident about it. I could ride with it, I could do it, but I felt much more confident and comfortable in my presentation when I knew exactly what I was talking about. So, you being a competition communicator, what are some advice that you can give to people, especially in the business world when, your boss comes in and says, hey, I need you to get in front of the executives and talk about this particular topic, and maybe you're not 100% privy about it. What's some techniques that you can give people, or some advice?
Absolutely, Tanya. And thanks for sharing that. I would say for me, if you do the harder thing outside of the boardroom becomes a joke. That's always been my perspective on communication. So there's 2 exercises I'll recommend. They'll take a pause in between so you can jump in with your thoughts as well. The first one is the random word exercise. Pick a random word like phone, like chaos, like master, like talk, like trophy case, and create random presentations out of thin air. And the reason why this is important is because if you can make sense out of nonsense, you could make sense out of anything. And that's why I recommend people in the boardroom to do this, because even if they'll be jumped on with a topic, it's usually not about the color blue. It's usually not about avocados. It's usually about something that they're an expert in or have some expertise in. So the random word exercise makes you do the harder thing outside of the boardroom. So when you're in the battle, you'll win.
That's awesome. And I think for me, when that would happen to me, I would focus on what I knew. I would be like, okay, I'm gonna, you give me this random topic, but I'm going to focus on what I know personally about this random topic. And what I began to recognize is I became the specialist in whatever I was speaking on, and I think that's what might challenge people or block them sometimes, is that they think that the audience may know more about their topic than they do. And so it causes a little bit of a challenge, for them to speak on that. And I know for me, it was very intimidating to get in front of a group of neurosurgeons or physicians or, whatnot, to get up there and speak on topics. But the reality is that I knew I specialized in the area that I spoke in. And so I knew more about it. And so, when it comes to public speaking, what are some other challenges that you think people may struggle with? Not just necessarily knowing the topic. What are some other things that come to the forefront, when you're standing there in front of all these people?
Right, Tanya, absolutely. So we talked about the random word exercise. To your point, if we do the harder thing, we get better. What's the next step? I would say the next step is what I call question drills. If people just implement this one tip, Tanya, they'll have gotten the value from the show. Very simple. We get asked questions all the time in our lifetime. On a podcast, in a boardroom, at work, from our families, we're always getting bombarded by questions. But most of us are reactive to those questions. We're not proactive. Example, when I started guesting on shows probably 3-4 years ago, I remember somebody asked me a question that I wasn't prepared for. He said, where does the fear of communication come from? Mm-hmm. And I looked at him and I said, London, Los Angeles, San Diego. I wasn't really sure. So I wasn't prepared. So instead, what I did is every single day for 5 minutes, that's all I ask, I wrote down and answered one question that I thought the world would ask me about my expertise. Okay. And if you do that every single day for 5 minutes for a year, you'll have answered 365 questions about your expertise, and you'll be bulletproof.
That's amazing. So, okay. So say, for example, someone is leaving the corporate world and they want to start their own business. They want to get online. They want to jump on YouTube or TikTok or Instagram, and they want to start promoting things. And then people start reaching out to them. Hey, will you be on my show? Will you, do this and that? This is where I'm recognizing, at least with my clients, is where they get stuck. They are like, okay, I'm in control of my voice, of what I'm putting out there. But then when someone asks me to be a guest, I get a little scared and I freak out. So that's an excellent practice to do, is to ask yourself what types of questions, or present the questions that to the guest or to the host of the show. And I like that because, it helps the host, know what questions to ask, but also you're prepared to know how to answer them. And I know one other thing that helped me, Brenden, when I started to public speak, was to speak in front of the mirror, to get used to my own voice, my own mannerisms, my own nonverbal, cues. I think that's really important as well. And whether you're communicating in front of 5,000 people or in front of one person, it's important to understand your nonverbal, right? So what are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I think you're absolutely spot on that, Tanya. It's all about understanding the different nuances of communication around us. And the other part that I would add to this is, especially for the introverts listening to this, is remember that you're in control, especially in the context you just drove around podcasting. Yeah, you're right. Sometimes it could be stressful, but what I will also say is remember, they're asking you to be on the show. So if you're not comfortable asking or answering off script questions, you just let them know. Hey, like I only work of questions, could you give me a list? And if they say no, you just don't do the interview. That's all. Of course, at this point in my career, I'm super easygoing. I can go into any direction 20 different ways. But when I got started, that wasn't the case. But the idea for everyone listening is make an excuse to do the thing, not do the thing. So if you're worried about random questions, just make it clear to the host, hey, how about we just agree on 15 questions that you're just going to ask me? And if we can't agree on that, I'll just move on to the other show. And that's really how we want to start that conversation to build it. But the key is really to do it, especially for those of you who want to be thought leaders who are listening to this. Podcasting on guest podcasting is super important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, it's okay to say, hey, I don't have the answer to that question. I think we get so caught up with having to answer everything. And me working in healthcare, I was getting bombarded with questions daily. And I was like, I honestly don't know the answer to that, but I'll get back to you. I'll research it. I'll figure it out. And we get so caught up in having to be perfect, and having to make sure that we have the perfect answer for everything. And it's okay if we say, I don't know, I'm still learning. I'm on my journey here. And I liked that about your description on your show, is that you said, hey, I'm still learning how to communicate. We all are. We're all going through this journey on our own, and we're learning from each other. And I think that's, very important to keep in consideration. So, when it comes to introverts, what's some advice that you can give to someone who is literally terrified to speak to someone at the grocery store, let alone jumping on to do some sort of a social media, communication, or even a workshop or a public speaking event?
Right. The $1 million question, Tanya. So there's two parts to that. The first step is always to dream. A lot of us, we dream about the expensive cars we want to buy, the expensive vacations we want to go on, the things we want to do with our family. When was the last time that we dreamed about our communication skills? And especially for introverts listening to this podcast, the answer is zilch, never. So I would start with this question. How would your life change if you were an exceptional communicator? When you start to focus on that outcome, it's a lot easier for you to actually go, like if I actually got better at this, life would be easier in this way. That's one piece. The other piece that's a bit more counterintuitive is realize why you're better than extroverts, right? So let me explain. There's 3 things that introverts do way better than extroverts, having coached hundreds of them over my career, that they aren't even aware of. And when it's brought to their awareness, their perspective around communication changes. So let's jump into them. Number 1, pausing. Pausing is the most important tool in communication, Tanya, as you know, because it allows us to emphasize points of our message. Well, guess what? Introverts have an easy time with this because they speak less, right?
They observe and they listen more.
Right, exactly. So they're saying less things. So naturally, it's easy for them to be comfortable in silence. Extroverts have a massive problem. And I know this because I'm an extrovert, is whenever I'm at a bar and I'm talking to someone and there's a pause, I immediately want to fill it up. What's your favorite color? Right? So that's one. And that's one. That second one is listening, right? We talked about that earlier. Introverts are exceptional listeners because they talk less. So they'll listen better. Whereas me, I'm yapping all the time. That's why I'm a great podcast guest, because I keep yapping. So listening is a lot easier for an introvert to master. That's 2. And then number 3, the most important one that no introvert knows is accessibility. They're a lot more accessible than extroverted speakers. Example, Gary Vaynerchuk. I love the guy to death. He's amazing. He's a big hero of mine. But you either like the guy or you don't. Right? And that's Gary. Brene Brown, there is no human being on earth who has said the following words. I hate Brene Brown. If you say that, you'll go to jail. The FBI will be after you. By the way, I love Brene Brown. I always like this, so people aren't attacking
or Wayne
me.
Dyer or any of those guys.
Literally, Wayne, Simon Sinek, John Maxwell, right? A lot of these introverted speakers, nobody really hates them. Nobody says, let's get a pitchfork and attack these people, which is the point.
That's funny. And that's so true, is that, introverts, and I call myself an introverted extrovert because I'm extremely extroverted in certain scenarios, but then I'm extremely introverted in others. And so, but it's taken me a long time to learn how to listen. And I think if you are an extrovert and you're an excellent communicator, you might want to work on listening. And if you're an excellent introvert listener, you might want to work on communicating. It's like a little bit of both, that you try to find the balance, in between. And I think it's funny. I grew up in a family that always talked over one another. And so when I got married, his family was very silent. We'd sit at the dinner table and they were quiet. And I felt like I needed to fill the silence because it felt very awkward. And so for my first year of marriage, I was learning how to just be okay sitting there eating and not saying a word. And it felt so strange. But then when I went back to be with my family, it felt so strange to just sit there and be quiet because they're looking at me like, what's wrong with you? So everybody, I think a lot of it is our childhood belief systems too, how we grow up and how we learn how to communicate, from our parents, our teachers, our peers, and all of that. And it's really just trying to reprogram ourselves to find balance in both the speaking and the listening. Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what are some other tools and tips that you have for people that may be struggling with getting out there and sharing their truth and their authenticity?
Absolutely, Tanya. So we talked about two of the three that I call my easy threes. Communication is like juggling 18 balls at the same time. And if we try and juggle all 18, all of them will just fall to the ground. So now the question becomes, what are the three easiest balls to juggle? So we covered two of them, which is the random word exercise. Pick a random word, do that a few times a day. Everyone's got 10 minutes because I'm assuming everyone listening to this podcast showers every day. Let's hope that is the case. That's one. Number two is question drills. 5 minutes a day is all I ask, once a day. That's it. Write down a question that you think the world will ask you and answer it. Simple. What about number three? Number three is so simple, nobody does it. Make a list of the people that you love. And Jeanette, ask yourself, when was the last time we sent them a 20-second video message to just say how grateful we are for them?
Oh, wow.
That's it. That's all we need to do. Because that lesson teaches us something really important about what communication is for. Because a lot of us think communication is a chore, like doing the dishes. Oh my God. I gotta like speak at the boardroom and do all this, instead of seeing it as a tool for impact. So I encourage you to do all those three things and you'll be much better at communication.
That's awesome. Those are some great tools and techniques. And so, what are some tools that can help people listen more? The pause, you talked about the pause. Are there some other tools that can help people?
Absolutely. So the pause is one of them for sure. The second one is the piece around questions versus statements. Always audit the percentage of questions versus statements that you're saying on a day-to-day basis. You'll find oftentimes that there's a lot more statements than there are questions. So just flip that a little bit around. That's the second piece. The third one is listen to podcasts like this, but very attentively. I actually did this to master listening. I still have a lot more to go, trust me. But I did it to get better. Why? Because what's nice about listening to podcasts, Tanya, like this, is the conversation is already over by the time someone listens to it. So the only choice that remains is to take notes and listen to the person. So don't just listen to the podcast, actually take notes on everything that's being said. And I do that 10 hours a week. That's why I'm a great listener.
That's awesome. So, and what that's doing, Brenden, is it's incorporating both the right and left hemispheres of the brain. And that's what I work with, is the subconscious mind. So when you are actually actively listening and then recording, you're using different hemispheres of the brain. And so what that's doing is it's programming your subconscious. And once you do that, you get better at, it. I know when I was public speaking, I got to the point where I could do any size venue, any time limit, because I got so good at, just I could draw it out if it needed to be an hour, or I could, bring it much smaller if it needed to be 5 minutes. I just got really good at it because I was so accustomed to the topic or the presentation that I got really good at being able to expand it or contract it, I guess, a little bit. So is there any other advice or any other tips or tools that you think we may not have covered, in the show that would be of value to the listeners?
Let me give you the most important one, Tanya. The best way to speak is to speak. Here's the problem with most people listening to the show right now. They're probably saying the following: wow, Tanya and Brenden really know a lot about communication. My goodness, Brenden shared some tips. Tanya shared all these great insights and questions, and they wrote down the random word exercise, the question drill, the video message, but they don't do it. That's the problem. So if you want to win, if you want to get the results from listening to the show, just listening to the podcast is not enough, my friends. How you get the result is booking 15 minutes in your calendar tomorrow to do the random word exercise 5 times, to do the question drill once, and to do a few video messages. And all it takes is 15 minutes to do all 3 exercises in a single day. So now the question becomes, are we going to spend the 15 minutes a day every day to do this? Because if we do, and everyone's got 15 minutes because we spent 30 minutes listening to this podcast, right? We can be successful. And that would be the most important thing I'd say.
And that's great, because just like anything, a sport, a hobby, whatever you're trying to get good at, you practice, right? And the more you practice, the better you get at it. And so, I laugh because my sister, I'm an extreme, I could get up in front of huge groups, and my sister could barely speak in front of 2. And so I was trying to teach her how to do that. And she would get, I called it turkey neck. Her whole neck would get red, and she would get really stressed out when she would get in front of the crowd. And, and a lot of it is, people feel like they have a hard time people staring at them, or they're going to be criticized, or they're going to be judged. How do you teach people to get over that? Just the being physically in front of, a group of people, not necessarily, you might be awesome at your topic, which my sister was fantastic at the topic, but it was more about being present in front of a large group of people. How do you, what advice do you give to that, to people that struggle with that?
Absolutely, Tanya. Here's what I'll say. The fear never goes away. It's just at a different level. I'll give you an example with me. Let's say we're having lunch. Me and you, we're having lunch together, and somebody calls me. I pick up the phone, and it's Elon Musk. And he says, hey, Brenden, been watching your YouTube videos for a while now. You're really good at what you do. How about this? I'll give you $1 million. Come tomorrow and coach me for a few hours. I'd really appreciate it. Would I shit my pants? Yeah. Yeah. Of course. Of course I would. Even if I've coached a ton of people, I'm super happy with the progress I've made in my life. That doesn't deny the fact that there's always a level that's scary for all of us. So what's the better frame? The better frame is to see fear in our message for what it is, which is a boxing match. Let me explain. Okay. One side of the ring is the fear, the stress, the anxiety. Oh my God, I don't know why. I got my turkey neck. I got my chicken neck, whatever.
This is what could happen, right?
Right. And then the other side of the ring, Tanya, is the message. Why does this actually matter? Why is this actually important? The goal is not for the fear to leave that ring. The goal is to make sure that when your message and your fear meet in the middle of that boxing match, that your message gets the knockout punch, that your message wins the match every single time you get into the ring. It's not about the fear to just run away, to make sure that every time you keep coming in the ring, the message knocks it out. Why is that? Why did I start Master Talk? I was a 22-year-old kid who has a crooked left arm, who studied in French his entire life as a second language, could barely speak French correctly, had a ton of anxiety, and at least you have a study in communication. I have a bachelor's degree in accounting, Tanya. Okay? Who in the world am I to do this? Why did I do it? I did it for the 15-year-old girl who can't afford me. That's why I started Master Talk. And that's way more important than any fear that's associated with it. So I knocked it out.
That's amazing. And that in itself, that's inspiring to me, because you went against the grain. You did something completely out of your comfort zone and said, I'm going to master my talk. I'm actually going to work on this. And through my journey, I'm going to assist others in doing this as well. And I think, that's really inspiring for all of us, because many of us go through these chapters in our life where we look back and say, maybe I got into this because my parents drove me into this, and now I'm not having any passion doing this, and I want to completely shift what I'm doing. And so many of the clients that I work with are in that transitionary stage. And it's funny. I just had someone recently who's like, I've been in accounting for 40 years and now I want to, start my own business, and I don't know how to start a YouTube channel and get out there, and I'm terrified, and this and that. So I think that this video will be of value to that person, specifically, because your story in itself inspires those who may be sitting behind a desk, maybe doing these things that they're ready to step out into the forefront and be more visible and seen. And I know for many of my clients, the fear of being seen, is a big one. And I know within myself, I remember just even in my wedding, having to walk down the aisle and everyone staring at me gave me anxiety, but yeah, I could stand in front of 5,000 people and talk about, my topics. So it's really funny how our fears are very layered, like you said. And once we overcome one, then, there's another one that we're like, okay, but then using that as our motivation and as our inspiration to succeed and to push through it. And then looking back and saying, wow, when I first started talking, being able to stand up in front of 5,000 people was terrifying. Just that one person I had to get in front of. And now looking back, it's like, no big deal. And so I love this conversation. I think we've touched on a lot of topics and it's been amazing. So Brenden, how can people reach out to you? Where can they check out, more information and find these free tools and tips that you give to help people communicate better?
Absolutely, Tanya. It was such a pleasure to be on your show. Thanks so much for having me. So 2 ways to keep in touch. The first one is the YouTube channel. Just go to Master Talk in one word. You'll have access to hundreds of free videos on how to master communication and effective communication as well. That's the first way. The second way is I do a free workshop over Zoom every 2 weeks. And these workshops are live over Zoom. They're not recorded. So if you want to jump in on one of them and see me coach people live, just jump in on the next free one at rockstarcommunicator.com.
Awesome. Very fun. Well, thank you, Brenden. I appreciate you sharing all of your valuable expertise, in this area. And I look forward to seeing all the comments and hearing all the comments that the listeners and the watchers, get to share with us once they've, gone out there and tackled their fears around speaking.
Sounds good, Tanya. Thanks so much for having me.
You deserve to navigate your life as an empath in alignment with health, happiness, and abundance. To learn more about the services that I provide, including Beyond Quantum Healing Hypnosis, EFT Tapping, and the Emotion Code, visit my website at www.thesoulcafe.org.